All right, guys, so the purpose of this video is to help you learn how to quote Shakespeare, and it can be kind of tricky. So this is something that I want to make sure that everybody understands. Also, I want you to be able to use this information and refer to it throughout your project. So I'm going to be sharing these slides with you on Google Classroom so you can come back to them and refer to them. All right, and as you know, this project is pretty heavy on quotes. You do have to integrate a lot of them. So this is definitely going to help you out with doing it correctly on your project and making sure that you do well in terms of that part of the rubric. So let's get started. All right, so first we're going to talk about the title and reference format. Now, as we discussed at the very beginning of the year, major works are always italicized. Titles of plays, novels, any major work is going to be italicized. Underline if you're handwriting. All right, and then you're going to have to place a parenthetical reference after each quote you use, and it needs to contain the act, the scene, and the line numbers. And these are supposed to be separated by periods. You don't use page numbers. All right, when you are citing the line ranges, a couple of things. All right, if it's under 100, you're going to do lines 34 through 37. All right, or let's say 72 through 79, 81 through 92. All right, just like you normally would. But if it's above 100, you repeat only the last two digits of the second number. All right, so 211 through 212, or through 12, or let's say 254 through 59, 281 through 83. Now, if you have an extra digit in there or you're going over into another 100, then of course you need to include that, like 397 through 405 or 96 through 102. We have to indicate that that we're moving into a different group of 100. All right, so if you were to do it, here's what it would look like. 12th Night, that is a title of a play. All right, so this, if I was quoting from it, this would be Act 1. That's what the 1 is for. Scene 5, and then my lines that I'm quoting from are 268 through 76. And you can see I dropped that 2 in the second number. All right, now, here's the thing. For this project, you are not required to include line numbers. I'm not making y'all do that because the text that I issue to you does not have line numbers, and I'm not going to make you go hunt down the line numbers. That's ridiculous. All right, I have read this play enough times to know, based on just the act and the scene number, where to find the line. So don't worry about line numbers. I just wanted to go over this so you know for future reference that you're aware of how to do this, because it is possible you could have to do this again. Okay, couple more things. Arabic numerals. We're using Arabic over Roman numerals. Sometimes you'll see older texts use Roman numerals for act and scene references. Even I've done it. Like right here, this would be coming from Act 3, and you see the capitalized Roman numerals. All right, scene 8, and scenes are lowercase, and then the line numbers, and they're each separated by periods. But we use the current rules of MLA, and right now they're saying use Arabic numerals. All right, so you separate the act, scene, and line numbers with periods, and the period goes after you close your parentheses. So, for example, Gloucester says, I stumbled when I saw. All right, and then that's coming from Act 4, Scene 2, line 108. And you see I put my period right here. It doesn't go inside the quotes. It goes after the closed parenthesis. All right, Cordelia says, nothing, my lord. That's from Act 1, Scene 1, line 78. Again, my period comes after the closed parenthesis. All right, now, since all of your references will come from King Lear, it is not necessary to include the play title for the project. I know what play we're doing. I'm pretty sure that you're good on that. So here in parentheses, you wouldn't put King Lear italicized 42108 because obviously this is about King Lear. Citing prose quotations. If a prose quotation runs 4 lines or less, put it in quotation marks and incorporate it in the text. And this is how you would normally incorporate a quote, just like any other time. So, for example, in Henry VIII, Part 1, the immensely obese Falstaff tells the prince, when I was about thy years, Hal, I was not an eagle's talon in the waist. I could have crept into any alderman's thumb ring. All right, so that is coming from Act 2, Scene 4, lines 325 through 327. All right, and you can see that my period goes after the closed parentheses, all right, and that I dropped that first digit in my second number since it was in the same 100th. Now, prose quotations, when they run more than 4 lines, that's when they get tricky. All right, and you format them as a block quotation. And when you do that, you start on a new line and you set the quotation 1 inch in from the margin, or you can just hit tab. Do not add quotation marks. And that's probably the weirdest, most uncomfortable part of using block quotations is you don't use quotes. All right, a colon generally introduces a block quotation. With block quotations, the period goes where it would normally be placed, and there is no period after the citation. So that's totally confusing to students and a very frequently made mistake for that reason, because it's very confusing, but that's why I'm going over this. So, for example, here, you can see I took a quote from Much Ado About Nothing. All right, and I give a little context at the beginning. Benedict reflects on what he has overheard Don Pedro, Leonardo, and Claudio say, and I have introduced it with a colon. All right, and again, this is prose. All right, so I'm just going to block it, and all that means is that I have indented each line 1 time. All right, and I'm going to type it in exactly the way it's written. Okay, so I don't need to worry about where the line's in or anything like that with prose. All right, now remember the 2 things that are confusing about block quotations. 1, we don't use quotes, and you can see there are no quotes. All right, and the reason for that is when you block, you indicate to your reader this is a quote. It's just a long quote. So the quotation marks really aren't necessary. And then the second thing that's probably even more confusing is the period goes in the opposite spot where I told you before. Before, with the non-blocked quotes, the period goes here, all right? But when we're blocking, the period goes before the citation. And don't ask me why MLA has this crazy, confusing rule, because I have no answer to that. Okay. Citing verse quotations. If you quote all or part of a single line of verse, put it in quotation marks within your text. All right, so Biron's pyrotechnic line, light, seeking light, doth light of light beguile, is a textbook example of antinaclasis. All right, and that comes from Act 1, Scene 1, line 177. Okay, so you can see I just kind of worked it into my text. All right. You can also incorporate 2 or even 3 lines in the same way. But when you do this, you use a slash with a space on each side to separate them. All right. So you can see here, I've got a space, a slash, and a space. All right. So let's look at an example here. In his soliloquy, Claudius alludes to the story of Cain and Abel when describing his crime. It hath the primal eldest curse upon it, a brother's murder. All right, so this is where the first line ended. This is where line 37 ended. Okay, and I maintain the original punctuation. I don't change that. I'll leave it there. Then I do a space. I do my slash and another space. All right, and then I'm going to write the last line there. Along with punctuation, you also need to maintain the original capitalization of the text. All of the verse lines begin with a capital letter. So you're going to begin, when you quote them, you're going to begin it with a capital letter. That slash will tell me that it's a new line. All right, so this is 2 lines coming from Hamlet. All right, let's go on. Citing verse quotations, even more. And you know what I'm going to say. If you have more than 3 lines of verse, you have to block it. All right, and you start a new line and set each line 1 inch from the left margin. Again, do not add quotation marks that aren't in the original, that is. And if the quotation starts in the middle of a line or verse, you're going to reproduce it that way. Don't shift it to the left margin. All right. Remember, with block quotations, the period goes where it would normally be placed, and there is no period after the citation. And that's the confusing part of blocks. So let's look at this. It is Jacques in As You Like It who delivers the famous speech comparing the world to a theater. All right, and I've introduced this block with a colon. You can see that I have blocked the quote. All right, it comes over 1 inch. All right, and when you are blocking verse, again, kind of like with prose, well, not with prose, but when you are blocking verse, you're going to basically reproduce it exactly the same way that Shakespeare did. So all the world's the stage is the first line. All right, and all the men and women merely players, that's the second line. That stupid black thing would move. I could tell you what specific line. Okay, so here is line 138, 139, 140, 141, 142. Okay, so you don't have to do the slashes or anything like that. That's nice and one of the advantages of the block. But just remember that you don't add any quotes with the block, and the period is oddly placed before the citation at the end and not after. All right, then just to kind of show you how, if I was writing this, how it would look. Let's say I had just written that, I've used that quote, and then I'm still writing the same paragraph. You can see I go back to where I would normally be. He then proceeds to enumerate and analyze these ages in depth. All right. Now, I'm going to talk in just a minute on the next slide about if a quotation starts in the middle of a line or verse, reproduce it that way. So I'll show you what I mean by that when we get into dialogue. All right. So if you quote dialogue between characters, set that as a block quotation. All right. And you're going to begin each part of the dialogue with the character's name, and you capitalize it, all caps, and then you place a period after the name, and then you start the quotation. All right. Then you have to indent any subsequent lines of the character's speech an extra quarter inch. Right. If the dialogue shifts to a new character, you start a new line. I'll show you that in just a minute. All right, and you're going to maintain this pattern throughout the quotation. So here we've got a quote that I have blocked from the Merchant of Venice. So here are my words. The Christians in Venice taught Shylock about his daughter's development. All right, and I have incorporated this dialogue between Shylock, and you can see his name is in all caps, as is Salarina, who he's talking to. All right, and I've placed a period after each name. Okay, of course, everything is blocked here. I have pretty much just repeated exactly what they've said. All right, now here it says, okay, indent any characters, subsequent lines of the character's speech in extra quarter inch. So you can see here, all right, it says, there is more difference between thy flesh. So there's more than one line here. So this only comes in a quarter of an inch. Doesn't really look like quarter of an inch, but that's as close as I could get it. So you need to indicate it here. Okay. All right, and then dialogue quotations. If the speakers share a verse or line, indent the second half of the shared verse to the right of the first half to visually maintain the line. All right, so here you can see a conversation between Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. So he says to her, "My dearest love, Duncan comes here tonight." And she says, "And when goes hence?" And he says, "Tomorrow, as he proposes." Or purposes. And she says, "Oh, never shall the sun that morrow see." All right, so you can see that I've incorporated their whole conversation here, and that I have blocked it just like I was talking about before. All right, this is coming from Act 1, Scene 5, lines 57 through 60. And these dialogue quotations can get a little tricky. I don't foresee you guys using a lot of these in your presentations. You might. And again, just remember, I am on hand. So that's ask. I'm glad to look at it and tell you how to fix it. All right, other important quoting rules. Remember, when completing the handout for this project and when quoting in general, you've got to provide context before your quote, including the speaker. Context includes the speaker. All right, for example, in response to Lear's objection to her answer to his question, Cordelia says, "Unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. I love your majesty, according to my bond, no more, no less." All right, so see, I have here less than 4 lines of verse. All right, and I have separated these lines with, or I've indicated the separations with the slash, the space, slash, space. I've maintained the original capitalization for each new line. All right, and because this is not blocked, the period goes here at the end. So this is from Act 1, Scene 1, lines 201 through 204. All right, here's another example. In an attempt to change Lear's mind about banishing Cordelia, Kent says to Lear, "See better, Lear, and let me still remain the true blank of thine eye." All right, and again, you can see I've done all of those things. I used the slash. I maintained the original capitalization. This is coming from Act 1, Scene 1, lines 330 through 32. All right, now, remember that you do not have to include the context and citation for any quotes in your actual presentation. You only have to do this in the handout. And I showed you guys that one video. In that one video, the quotes just kind of pop up there randomly, but that's okay because they're explained and context is given and the citation is provided on a handout. All right, so just know that you don't have to provide all that in the actual, if you're doing a video or something like that, you don't need to give the context. Just somehow, very creatively, get the quote in there. All right, last of all, the 4 methods. We've got to review these. All right, so when you're integrating quotes, 4 different ways we can do it. We can use an introductory or explanatory signal phrase followed by a comma before the quote. For example, angered by Kent's warning, Lear says, "Out of my sight." All right, and because there is a exclamation point here, I'm going to maintain that. All right, this is coming from Act 1, Scene 1, line 329, and then my period for this sentence, not for what Lear's actually saying, but my sentence here is going to go at the end after the close parentheses. All right, the second method is to weave the quotation into your own sentence without any punctuation between your own words and the words you are quoting. All right, and using that is an easy way to accomplish this. So here we have an example. When Edmund says that he is some 12 or 14 moonshines lag of a brother, the audience realizes he's the youngest son. All right, and I don't do my citation here in the middle of the sentence. Instead, you do it here at the end. So that's coming from Act 1, Scene 2, lines 113 through 115. All right, the third method, introduce the quotation with a complete sentence and a colon. All right, and of course, this is an easy rule to remember or to go by, that if you use a complete sentence to introduce a quote, you need a colon after the sentence. All right, don't confuse the colon with the semicolon. All right, for example, Edmund feels he has been slighted as a bastard and is entitled to just as much as his brother Edgar. And there's my colon. Well, then, and I picked up in the middle of the line there, so it looks like a very short line. All right, well then, comma, and then space slash space, new line, legitimate Edgar, I must have your land. All right, so that's the quote. All right, I've ended the quote, and then here, this is coming from Act 1, Scene 2, lines 128 through 30. All right, last, use short quotations or only a few words as part of your own sentence. Edmund, though self-described as base, believes he can stand in the plague of custom and claim what's rightfully his. I've just taken those few short little words and I've weaved them into my own sentence. Kind of similar to method 2, except I'm not using that here. All right, so this is coming from Act 1, Scene 2, lines 120 through 125. Okay. All right. So now that I've gone through all this and I have shared these slides with you on Classroom, I want you to do the little quiz that I've made. All right. And of course, that's open note. All right. So feel free to refer back to this as much as you need to. And of course, if you have any questions, let me know.